The wind carried a strange stillness that day. It was the kind of silence that makes even the birds hold their breath. The trees stood tall like ancient guardians, their branches whispering secrets to each other that no one else could understand. Somewhere between the sound of crunching leaves and the faint whistle of the wind, a small figure moved quietly, barefoot, hungry, and alone. His name was Eli. Eli had been wandering the forest since the last snow melted. No one remembered him except the old folks from the village who said he'd lost his parents to fever 2 winters ago. The town had buried them, given him a few scraps of food, and then left him to the mercy of the world. But Eli didn't cry anymore. He had learned that tears didn't bring back bread or warmth. They only blurred your vision when you needed to see clearly. He was small for his age, with hair the color of dust and eyes that looked far older than 12. His clothes were torn, the edges stiff with dirt, and his hands were raw from digging for roots. He had a small knife tied to his belt, a dull thing he'd found by a broken wagon. That knife was his only tool, his only friend, and his only defense. He carried it like a soldier carries hope. That morning, hunger gnawed at his stomach like a wild animal. He had eaten nothing since the afternoon before, when he'd found a handful of berries near the river. He knew he couldn't survive on berries much longer. Winter would come again, and if he didn't find shelter or food, the cold would finish what fate had started. So he followed the faint path of deer tracks deeper into the woods where he'd never dared go before. The forest here was darker. The sunlight struggled to reach the ground through the thick canopy above. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the air, and somewhere in the distance water trickled over stones. Eli moved slowly, alert, watching for rabbits or squirrels. He had learned how to make small traps from vines and branches, though more often than not they stayed empty. Still, he kept trying. Hope was the only thing he had left, and even that was beginning to wear thin. After hours of searching, he stopped by an old oak and leaned against it, exhausted. His breath came in short gasps, his lips dry, his stomach aching. He closed his eyes for just a moment, and that's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the forest. It was faint, almost like a whisper, a groan. Then silence. Eli's head snapped up. He listened hard. For a moment, all he could hear was the wind. Then it came again, closer this time, a low, broken moan, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging against the ground. His heart began to pound. He crouched low, gripping his knife tightly, and crept toward the sound. Every step was careful, measured. His bare feet barely disturbed the leaves. He had learned from foxes how to move without being noticed. The noise grew louder, mixed now with harsh breathing and the soft rustle of fabric. He moved around a cluster of ferns, and that's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a fallen log, dark and long, lying by a small stream. But then it moved. His heart leapt into his throat. He froze, staring. The figure on the ground was a man, a large man dressed in strange clothes that shimmered faintly with beads and leather. His chest rose and fell weakly. Blood soaked through a torn patch near his thigh, dark and thick against the earth. Eli took a step back, terrified. He had heard stories about the people who lived beyond the river, the tribes who painted their faces and hunted with bows. The villagers had called them savages, though Eli had never seen one before. They said the tribes guarded their land fiercely, and that anyone who trespassed disappeared forever. Eli had always believed those stories, but now one of those people lay before him dying. He stood there, torn between fear and pity. His first thought was to run, to turn back and never speak of what he'd seen. But as he looked at the man's face, creased with pain, lips dry, breath shallow, something inside him shifted. He saw not a warrior or a stranger, but someone who was fighting the same thing he'd been fighting his whole life, the will to stay alive. The man groaned again and tried to lift his head. His eyes opened slightly, dark eyes, sharp even in weakness. They met Eli's for a moment, and Eli felt something pass between them. Not words, but understanding. The man tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasping sound. He reached a trembling hand toward Eli, then let it fall. Eli took a hesitant step forward. His knife trembled in his grip. "Don't hurt me," he whispered, though he wasn't sure the man could understand. The man didn't move. Only the rise and fall of his chest proved he was still alive. Eli knelt beside him, studying the wound. The blood had slowed, but the gash was deep, ugly, and full of dirt. The man must have been crawling for a long time. His leg was swollen and his breathing sounded heavy, strained. Eli didn't know much about medicine, but he knew enough to clean a wound. He had done it for himself countless times. He glanced at the stream nearby and then at the man again. "I'll be right back," he whispered, though he doubted the man could hear. He ran to the stream, cupped water in his hands, and brought it back. The man's lips moved slightly as if asking for it. Eli let a few drops fall into his mouth. The man swallowed weakly. That small movement, just that, was enough to make Eli stay. He looked down at his own shirt, the only one he had. It was torn and filthy, but it would have to do. He tore a strip from the bottom and used it to press against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The man groaned softly but didn't resist. Eli worked as carefully as he could, his hands trembling. He poured a little water to wash away the dirt, then tied the cloth around the man's leg as tight as he dared. When he finished, he sat back, breathing hard. The man's face looked calmer now, though his eyes were closed again. Eli wasn't sure what to do next. He couldn't just leave him there, but he couldn't stay out in the open either. The forest was full of dangers, wolves, cold nights, and now the possibility that the man's people might come looking for him. If they found Eli here, they might think he was the one who hurt him. Still, something deep in his chest told him he couldn't walk away. The man had no one else, and neither did he. Eli dragged together some branches and leaves, making a rough bed under a large tree near the stream. It took all his strength to move the man, inch by inch, his small body straining against the weight. Every time he stopped to catch his breath, he looked at the man's face to make sure he was still alive. When he finally got him settled, the sun was dipping low, turning the forest gold. He built a small fire with dry sticks and flint stones he had hidden in his pocket. The smoke curled up lazily, blending with the evening mist. He sat beside the man, feeding the fire and glancing at him from time to time. He thought of the stories he'd heard around the village fires, the ones that painted the tribes as ruthless and wild. But this man, lying broken and silent, didn't look like a monster. He looked human. As the sky darkened, Eli began to talk softly just to break the silence. "You don't understand me, do you?" he said. "That's okay. I don't have anyone to talk to anyway." He poked the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "You're hurt real bad? I wish I knew what happened. Maybe an animal. Or maybe someone hurt you. People hurt each other a lot, don't they?" He paused, staring at the flames. "My ma used to say there's good in everyone, even when the world's mean. She said if you help someone, the world gets a little less dark. She was like that, always believing in things I couldn't see." His voice faltered. "She died, though. They both did. Nobody helped them." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, angry at himself for feeling weak. The man's breathing was steady now, deeper than before. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was dying. Eli couldn't tell. But as the night deepened and the fire burned low, he found himself watching over the stranger the way his mother used to watch over him. The stars came out, bright and cold. Eli lay on the ground beside the fire, his arm over his eyes. Every sound in the forest seemed louder. The crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind, the hoot of an owl. He felt fear creeping into his bones again, but he didn't move. Sometime in the middle of the night, he woke to the sound of a groan. The man was stirring, his body shifting. Eli scrambled to his side. The man's eyes opened just slightly, reflecting the glow of the fire. He stared at Eli for a long time before whispering something in a language Eli didn't know. The words were soft, but the tone was kind. Eli leaned closer. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe here." The man blinked, his lips twitching as if trying to form a smile. Then his eyes rolled back and he went still again. Eli sat there until dawn, afraid to sleep. When the first light broke through the trees, painting the forest in silver, he leaned closer to check on the man. The stranger's breathing was still there, slow but strong. Eli let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He smiled faintly and whispered, "You're gonna make it." He didn't know then that this single act of kindness, one orphan's choice to stay, would change everything. That deep in the heart of that silent forest, the bond between a lost boy and a wounded warrior had just begun, a bond that would soon echo through the hearts of 200 men and rewrite the meaning of family forever. Eli didn't sleep that night, though exhaustion pressed on him like a heavy blanket. The man's breathing rose and fell softly beside the fire, and every time it paused too long, Eli's heart would leap in panic. He had seen death before. Cold faces, still bodies, and he didn't want to see that look again. Not here, not now. Something deep in him clung to the fragile hope that this stranger would live. He had saved no one before. Maybe just this once he could. The forest around them was different in the dark. Shadows stretched like living things, and every noise seemed sharper, hungrier. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled, the sound echoing through the trees. Eli sat up straight, his small hands gripping the knife handle tightly. The fire flickered low, throwing long shapes against the bark of the trees. He fed it another stick and glanced at the man. His face was turned toward the flames, pale beneath streaks of dirt and blood. Eli wondered what kind of man he had been before the forest broke him. When the first light came, it was soft and cold, creeping through the branches like a secret. Eli rubbed his eyes and stretched his arms. The man was still alive. His breathing was steadier, his chest moving rhythmically. The cloth Eli had tied around his leg was soaked through, but the bleeding had stopped. Eli let out a small sigh of relief. For the first time in days, his chest didn't feel so heavy. He crawled to the stream and drank deeply, cold water burning down his throat. Then he filled his hands again and brought some back for the man. "Here," he whispered, lifting the man's head just a little. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were dark and sharp, but not frightening. He stared at Eli as though trying to place him in a dream. Eli spoke softly as if talking to an injured bird. "You need water. Drink." He held the water to the man's lips. The man hesitated, then swallowed slowly, his cracked lips trembling. "Good," Eli murmured, relieved. "That's good." The man coughed weakly and a few drops spilled down his chin. Eli wiped them away with the edge of his sleeve. The man mumbled something in his language, a few short sounds, deep and rhythmic. Eli shook his head. "I don't understand, but it's okay. You just rest." The man blinked once, slowly, as if in thanks. Then his eyes closed again and he drifted back into uneasy sleep. Eli sat beside him, unsure of what to do next. He had never taken care of anyone before. He knew how to survive alone, how to find roots to eat, how to hide from storms. But caring for another person felt like something bigger, heavier. Still, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. He had seen kindness once before in his life from his mother's eyes. Maybe that was enough to carry him now. The day passed slowly. Eli spent it searching the woods nearby for food. He found a patch of wild onions and a few mushrooms he recognized from before. He built a small fire pit, filled a tin cup with water, and made a thin soup. When it was warm, he scooped a little on a leaf and touched it to the man's lips. At first, there was no response. Then the man swallowed weakly but surely. "You'll be all right," Eli said quietly, more to convince himself than the man. "You just need time." He ate the rest of the soup in small bites, glancing at the forest. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. The air carried a strange weight, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He had wandered deep into unknown land, and for the first time he wondered if he'd made a mistake. Still, he stayed. By late afternoon, the man stirred again. This time when he opened his eyes, he seemed more aware. He tried to move his injured leg, but the pain hit him fast. He let out a deep groan that made Eli jump. "No, don't," Eli said quickly, pressing his hand gently on the man's chest. "You'll open it again." The man stilled, breathing hard. His eyes fixed on Eli, filled with confusion and something else, recognition maybe. He pointed weakly toward the trees, murmuring words Eli couldn't understand. Eli shook his head. "You can't go anywhere. You'll die out there." The man didn't respond, only turned his gaze toward the sky, where shafts of sunlight broke through the branches. His face softened as though remembering something far away. Hours passed like that, quietly, slowly. The forest's rhythm wrapped around them, the songs of birds and the rustle of the wind filling the spaces where words failed. Eli found himself studying the man's face more closely. His skin was marked with faint lines of red paint near his temples, smudged and faded now. Around his neck hung a small pendant carved from bone, worn smooth with age. Whoever he was, he had been someone important, someone loved. That thought hit Eli harder than he expected. Someone out there might be missing this man. Someone might be waiting for him to come home. And yet here he was, hidden deep in the forest with a boy no one cared about. Night came again, and Eli built another fire. The man's fever had risen slightly, his forehead damp with sweat. Eli dipped a rag into cool stream water and pressed it gently to his head. "You're burning up," he whispered. "Don't you go dying on me now. Not after I dragged you here." The man's lips moved, and though Eli couldn't understand the words, his tone was soft, almost grateful. He reached weakly for Eli's wrist, his fingers rough and warm. For a moment, they stayed like that. The man holding on, Eli frozen in surprise. Then the hand fell away, heavy with sleep. Eli stared at the fire for a long time after that. Something stirred inside him, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. Connection. It scared him, and yet it made him feel alive. The next morning, he woke to the sound of soft movement. The man was sitting up barely, his back resting against a tree. His eyes were open now, clearer, more focused. Eli hurried to his side. "Hey, you shouldn't be moving yet." The man looked at him and spoke a few words, slow and deliberate. Eli frowned. "I don't know what that means." The man tried again, this time gesturing with his hands. He pointed to his chest and said a word that sounded like tawa. Tawa. Eli repeated, uncertain. The man nodded weakly. Then he pointed to Eli, waiting. Eli hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked his name that it felt strange on his tongue. "Eli," he said softly. "I'm Eli." "Tawa," the man said again, pressing his palm to his chest. Then with effort he pointed to Eli and repeated, "Eli." A small smile tugged at Eli's mouth. "Yeah, Eli." They stayed like that for a while, repeating the names back and forth as though solidifying something sacred. It wasn't just words, it was a bridge forming between two worlds. As the sun rose higher, Eli checked the man's wound again. The bleeding had stopped completely, though it looked deep and angry. He cleaned it as best he could and tied a fresh strip of cloth around it. The man winced but didn't pull away. When Eli was done, Tawa looked at him and said something that sounded like thanks. Eli didn't understand, but he smiled anyway. "You're welcome." They ate what little food Eli had left, roots, onions, and a few bitter berries. Tawa ate slowly, as though his body had forgotten how. Then he leaned back against the tree, eyes half closed, and began to hum softly. It was a strange melody, low and haunting, like the sound of wind passing through reeds. Eli listened, feeling the sound move through him. It was the first music he'd heard in years. When Tawa stopped, he looked at Eli and made a sweeping motion toward the forest, then at his chest, then toward the sky. Eli didn't know exactly what he meant, but he thought he understood. This forest was his home. The day stretched long and quiet. Eli helped Tawa drink more water, fed the fire, and watched over him as he slept. But as evening drew near, a new sound reached his ears. A distant echo, faint but distinct. Drums. Slow. Rhythmic. Coming from somewhere deep in the forest. Eli froze. His first thought was that danger was coming. Maybe the man's people were nearby. Maybe they were searching for him, and when they found a wounded tribesman lying beside a strange boy, they might not listen to explanations. He glanced at Tawa, but the man's expression was calm. He listened to the sound for a long moment, then looked at Eli and nodded slowly as if to say, "It's all right." Eli didn't believe that. His hands shook as he threw more wood on the fire. "We should hide," he whispered. But Tawa didn't move. He just stared into the flames with quiet eyes, humming that same low tune again. When night finally fell, the drums faded into silence. Eli didn't sleep. He sat there wide-eyed, staring at the man who had somehow changed everything. He had entered the forest as a lonely orphan, a boy who only looked after himself, but now he found himself protecting someone else, someone completely different, someone he didn't even understand. Before dawn, Tawa stirred again. His strength seemed to be returning bit by bit. He looked at Eli and pointed toward the east where the sun was beginning to rise. Then he said, "Come." Eli frowned. "Come, where?" Tawa gestured again, east, then to himself, then to Eli. "Come." Eli's stomach tightened. He didn't know what Tawa meant, but something told him it wasn't just a walk through the woods. This man had a purpose now, and somehow Eli was part of it. He packed what little he had, his knife, a bit of food, and the rags he'd used for bandages. He glanced once more at the forest behind him, the place that had been his only home for so long. Then he turned toward the man he'd saved. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll go with you." He didn't know then that this single choice would lead him out of the shadows of the forest and into the heart of something much greater, a destiny he could never have imagined, and a home he had never dared to dream of. The morning was misted with silver light when they set out. Dew clung to the grass like tiny shards of glass, and the forest air smelled fresh and sharp. Eli walked beside the wounded man, Tawa, his heart caught somewhere between fear and curiosity. He had never gone this deep into the woods before. The trees here were older, thicker, their roots winding like the veins of the earth itself. Every now and then Tawa would pause, lean against a tree for balance, and motion for Eli to wait. His wounds still slowed him down, but the fire in his eyes was back. He was a man on a mission, even if Eli didn't yet understand what that mission was. For hours they moved in silence, broken only by the sound of snapping twigs beneath their feet and the soft hum of morning insects. Eli watched how Tawa moved, how he read the forest like it was alive. He would stop and touch certain trees, lift his head to catch the direction of the wind, or kneel to examine a mark on the ground. Every gesture felt deliberate, meaningful. It fascinated Eli. To him, the forest had always been a place of hunger and danger. But to Tawa, it was a living thing, a companion. When the sun climbed higher, Eli's stomach growled. He reached into his small pouch and pulled out the last of his food, a few roots and a piece of dried bark he'd been saving. He broke it in half and offered a piece to Tawa. The man looked at it, then at Eli, and shook his head. "No," he said softly, pointing to Eli. "You." Eli frowned. "No, you need it more than I do." Tawa smiled faintly and pushed Eli's hand back. "You." The word carried a weight that made Eli stop arguing. He took a small bite and tucked the rest away. For a few moments they just stood there, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. There was something peaceful about it, a shared quiet between two people who didn't share a language but somehow understood each other anyway. By midday, the forest began to change. The trees spread farther apart, the ground rising into gentle slopes. Birds darted between branches, calling out in bursts of sound. Tawa walked a little faster now, leaning less on his makeshift cane. His limp was still there, but his strength was returning. Every now and then he would glance at Eli and nod, as if encouraging him to keep up. Eli's legs ached, but he refused to fall behind. He didn't want to disappoint the man he had saved. Somewhere deep down he was beginning to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. They came to a stream wider than any Eli had seen before. Its water sparkled like glass, winding lazily through the valley ahead. Tawa knelt beside it and cupped his hands to drink. He motioned for Eli to do the same. The water was cold, pure, and tasted like life itself. After they drank, Tawa took something from around his neck, a small carved pendant of bone, and dipped it into the water. He closed his eyes and murmured words in his language, his tone low and rhythmic, almost like a prayer. Then he looked at Eli, his gaze softening, and gestured for him to do the same. Eli hesitated, unsure what to do. But Tawa's eyes were kind, patient, so Eli reached into the water, scooped up a handful, and let it fall through his fingers. Tawa smiled faintly, as if that small act meant something more than Eli could grasp. The sun had started its slow descent when they reached a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of land. Eli stopped, his mouth falling open. Below them stretched a valley like something out of a dream. Smoke curled from several fires in the distance, and there were shapes moving. Many shapes. People. Horses. The faint sound of drums carried on the wind. Eli's stomach tightened. "Who are they?" he whispered, though he already knew. Tawa didn't answer with words. He just pointed to the valley and said, "My people." Eli's pulse quickened. 100 stories rushed through his mind. The ones whispered by villagers about fierce warriors who defended their land with arrows and war cries. He remembered the fear in those tales, the way adults spoke of the tribes as ghosts of the forest, untamed and ruthless. And now he was standing above their home. He took a step back. "We shouldn't go down there," he said, panic rising in his chest. "They'll think I hurt you." Tawa turned to him, his face calm but firm. "Come," he said again. Eli shook his head. "No, they'll kill me. I should go back." But Tawa's hand came to rest gently on his shoulder, his grip steady. His voice softened, and though Eli didn't understand the words that followed, the tone was clear. "Trust me." Eli looked into his eyes and saw no fear, no anger, just quiet certainty. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Okay, I'll come." They descended the slope together, moving slowly through the tall grass. The closer they got, the clearer the sounds became. The steady rhythm of drums, the chatter of voices, the crackle of fire. Eli's heart pounded so hard it felt like the forest itself could hear it. When they reached the edge of the valley, the first figures appeared, 2 men on horseback, their faces painted, bows slung across their backs. They saw Tawa first, then Eli. One of them shouted something sharp in their language, and in an instant, more figures emerged from the shadows. 10, 20, maybe more. Eli froze where he stood. Tawa lifted his hand, shouting something back. The riders halted, their eyes flicking between him and the small, dirt-covered boy beside him. Eli could feel their suspicion, their confusion. He wanted to disappear into the ground. Then one of the warriors dismounted and hurried forward. He said something in a rush, his tone urgent. Tawa answered, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Eli couldn't understand a single word, but he could feel the weight of it, the recognition, the disbelief. The warrior's eyes widened. He turned toward the others and shouted. A wave of motion swept through the valley. People emerged from tents and fires, gathering in clusters, pointing, whispering. Eli wanted to run, but Tawa's hand stayed firm on his shoulder. They walked forward slowly, surrounded now by dozens of warriors. The air felt electric. Every step echoed with meaning Eli couldn't grasp. As they approached the center of the camp, a group of elders stood waiting. Among them was a tall man with hair streaked with gray and eyes that burned like coals. His presence alone commanded silence. The crowd parted as he stepped forward. Tawa bowed his head slightly, speaking in that same deep, rhythmic tongue. The tall man listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Tawa finished, he gestured toward Eli, his voice softening. The chief's eyes followed his gesture until they landed on the boy. Eli swallowed hard. He didn't know whether to bow, to run, or to speak. His legs trembled, but he stood still, staring up at the man who looked at him like he was some strange creature from another world. The silence stretched until the chief finally spoke, his tone low and commanding. Tawa responded with a single word, Eli. That name rippled through the crowd like a wave. Eli caught fragments of whispers around him, voices rising and falling in disbelief. The chief looked from Tawa's bandaged leg to the boy's dirt-covered hands, and something in his face shifted. Without a word, he stepped closer to Eli. His shadow fell over the boy. Eli held his breath, certain that this was the end, that any second a knife would flash or a spear would be raised. Instead, the chief reached out and placed a large, weathered hand on Eli's head. The crowd gasped. Then the drums started again, slow, rhythmic, steady. Tawa's eyes glistened as he watched. He turned to Eli, speaking softly. You saved life, now. You are one of us. Eli's mind spun, trying to grasp the meaning of the words. The drums grew louder, echoing through the valley. Warriors began to chant in unison, a sound that rolled like thunder. They weren't shouting in anger. They were welcoming. One by one, they stepped forward. Men, women, and children offering nods, smiles, and small gestures of respect. Some touched his shoulder. Others placed their hands over their hearts. Eli stood frozen, overwhelmed. The fear that had filled him moments ago melted into something else, something bright and heavy all at once. Tawa placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the fires. The chief followed, speaking in deep tones to the others. The smell of roasted meat and smoke filled the air. Someone handed Eli a wooden bowl filled with stew. He stared at it for a long moment before taking a bite. It was warm, rich, alive with flavor. He hadn't eaten anything like it in years. As the night deepened, the valley filled with music, drums, flutes, voices rising into the stars. Children danced around the fire, their laughter blending with the rhythm. Tawa sat beside Eli, his face illuminated by the flames. He looked at the boy and said quietly, "No more alone." Eli didn't reply. His throat was tight, his eyes wet with something he couldn't name. For years he had drifted through life like a ghost, unseen, unwanted. But now, surrounded by warmth, by people, by acceptance, something in him finally began to thaw. He looked around at the sea of faces, warriors and elders, mothers and children, and realized that for the first time in his life he was not on the outside looking in. He was part of something. The drums continued late into the night, their rhythm echoing through the valley, into the trees, into the stars. And when Eli finally lay down beside the fire, his eyes heavy with sleep, he felt something he had forgotten long ago. Peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would stay forever or if the world beyond the forest would call him again. But in that moment, under a sky filled with light, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer an orphan of the woods. He was Eli, the boy who saved a warrior, and found a home among 200 hearts that beat as one.